The Granma Rebelde International Festival continues on its third and final day in Havana. Let's go with our correspondent Belen Santos for all the details.
Hello studios, I greet you here from Havana, Cuba. Once again, this is the third day of the Granma Rebelde Festival. We've been bringing a little bit of everything that's happening here, the debates on journalism, on a revolutionary journalism, everything that Cuba has learned from its experience and everything that people around the world have also learned. And particularly in this festival, that's been a call for participants of over 30 countries to come here, not only to celebrate those 60 years of Granma and Juventud Rebelde, but also to discuss on the present challenges of a very complex geopolitical situation and the role that journalism is playing in that context. And for that, we are now welcoming Brenda Lopez. She is the co-founder of Hands Off Cuba in the U.S. Hello, Brenda. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you, actually. And you're coming from L.A., right? So tell us a little bit what's been like to come be here in Cuba from the experience of everything that's going on over there.
Yeah, so it's always a pleasure to be here in Cuba. Our main thing is every May Day we bring delegations of Cuba to experience what it is. That's the cultures, the people, you know, a little bit of everything. But the biggest thing is for them to experience something outside of what we are used to. In the U.S., as you might know, our medias are very influenced by money and by people in power, and in that regard, there's a lot of stuff that is left out. And one of those things in particular is Cuba, and so that's where our committee comes in trying to educate the public on not only what Cuba has to offer, but what our government is doing to Cuba with these 246 sanctions and the state list of terrorism. So what better thing than bringing people to Cuba for them to see it themselves, the impact that these sanctions have, and the impact that us not knowing what Cuba has to offer also has on us.
Exactly, and everything that has to do with the movement of solidarity with Cuba from the U.S. itself knows a lot about the narratives that are trying to be imposed in Western media and how hard it is, but how important to build counter-narratives and spreading the information from alternative outlets, building our own sources and our own platforms as well. And I assume that in this context, where you have in the U.S. an even more aggressive stance against migration, against Latin America as a region as a whole, and also a military escalation in the Caribbean, this must be much more important. How are you living that situation? And what do you think is the role of media outlets or social organizations in that context from within the United States?
Yeah, so I think it's super important from within the United States for us ourselves to kill that misinformation, you know, not just saying like, oh, these people say this, but for us ourselves to say our narrative, because a lot of times the people who are suffering the consequences of the actions of our politicians are the people who don't get a voice. And so in this regard, I think independent journalism is super important in offering people a different narrative than they hear all the time.
One of the things that we've been discussing with different participants here in the festival, many coming from the U.S., has to do with how the people really feel about, for example, the military escalation in the Caribbean. We know that the U.S., the people in the U.S. are fighting their own struggles in terms of the difficulties and economic and inflation in access to health care, for example. And it's really the possibility of forging that solidarity among the peoples to understand that there is a common cause with the peoples of Latin America. How are you dealing with that over there? What do you perceive with the people when you talk to them about Latin America, about Cuba, especially in LA, where there are so many migrants and also their sons and daughters? How do you feel that perception of a possible unity between the working class?
Well, I think the protest that we just had yesterday and all over the U.S. says a great deal of where people are standing. They see that our politicians are not for the people, they're for profit. And in that regard, once we also bring in the narrative of Cuba and Venezuela, within our context, people start to question it, like, wow, our country just doesn't do that to other people, it does it to us. And these No King protests that have been happening monthly and growing each month, like with the ones yesterday being the big ones yet, Washington D.C. was covered for miles, you know. I think, right, I think that speaks volume as how uncontent people are with the current situation. And when people are uncontent, they start to look for something different than what they always hear. And I think this is a perfect opportunity for committees like ours and independent journalists to come in and fill in those gaps, you know, and give people a different narrative and context where they can learn and then hopefully support us. And I actually want to bring up a campaign we're about to start from our committee when we come back on Tuesday. We're having a report back in Miami, and we're actually going to launch a campaign to pressure the Olympic Committee to give visas to Cuban athletes, well, to participate first in the pre-Olympics so then they can qualify for the Olympics. And I think something like that is really something international that brings some people together, because, you know, that's beyond politics. It's like even something cultural like sports is being affected by our legislations and our government, you know?
Exactly, and also points out to how the U.S. has been manipulating the visas in a political way. We've seen that in the UN with such a terrible effect of, for example, the Palestinian delegation not being able to voice their own experience at such an important time. Thank you so much, Brenda. We will continue to look for those campaigns, continue to spread the word and the solidarity and everything that you've been saying about, well, when people are discontent, they look for different alternatives, and we are here exchanging experiences in order to learn from each other. So thank you for being here with teleSUR English.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful connecting, and it's been a wonderful experience to connect internationally on how we can work together to break those narratives.
We'll definitely continue to do so. So a little bit of what is happening here. We've been saying this festival is about understanding and also continuing to question, continue to make up new answers to what journalism needs today in a context of geopolitical wars, in a context of aggression against our region, but also the great power that lies in solidarity, the great power that lies in just exchanging our experiences. This continues to happen here in Havana, Cuba. We'll be back for more now. We go back to studios.